What an enlightened mind actually sees. Buddhist wisdom. Most of us carry a quiet assumption about enlightenment. We imagine it as gaining something extraordinary, some kind of higher vision, a supernatural power, a secret knowledge that ordinary people cannot access. We picture the enlightened mind as a mind that sees more. But what if that assumption is completely backwards? What if enlightenment is not about seeing more, but about finally stopping seeing wrong? There is a term in the ancient Pali language, yathabhuta-jnana-dassana. It means seeing and knowing things as they truly are, not as we wish them to be, not as we fear them to be, not through the filter of our habits and reactions, but as they actually are, right here, right now, without distortion. The Buddha did not describe enlightenment as adding a new layer of perception to the mind. He described it as removing something, removing illusions, removing projections, removing the constant interference of a self that keeps inserting itself between us and what is real. Let that sink in for a moment. What if the peace we have been searching for was never something we needed to find, but something we needed to stop covering up? So the question is simple and deep. What is this filter we are all looking through? And when it is removed, what does the mind actually see? Have we ever stopped to wonder whether what we see is reality itself, or just our interpretation of it? There is a good chance that what we call seeing clearly is actually seeing through a filter so familiar, so constant, that we have forgotten it is there. The Buddha identified three forces at the root of this: lobha, dosa, and moha, greed, aversion, and delusion. Together, they are called the three poisons. But these are not merely bad emotions we feel from time to time. They are perceptual filters, embedded in the way our minds process every moment of experience. When greed is present, even subtly, we look at the world and see things to acquire, things to hold on to, things that promise to complete us. When aversion is present, the lens flips. We see threats, obstacles, people who are wrong, situations that need to be resisted. And when delusion is present, and this may be the most dangerous one, we do not even recognize that the other two are running the show. We genuinely believe we are seeing clearly. And if that is the case, how would we ever know? Consider how this works in ordinary life. Two people sit in the same room, looking at the same situation, and they see completely different realities. Not because reality is different for each of them, but because their filters are different. One is driven by wanting, the other by fearing, and neither realizes they are wearing lenses at all. Now, behind these three poisons, the Buddha identified something deeper. In the teaching of dependent origination, Paticca-samuppada, he laid out 12 links that explain how suffering arises. The very first link is avijja, ignorance. But not ignorance as a blank space waiting to be filled. In the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha defined avijja with striking clarity. It is not knowing suffering, not knowing the origin of suffering, not knowing the cessation of suffering, and not knowing the path leading to that cessation. This tells us something important. Avijja is not a passive absence. It is an active misunderstanding of the most basic truths of our existence. Without realizing it, we may carry convictions that feel completely true. The belief that things are permanent, that there is a fixed self at our center, that clinging will lead to lasting happiness. And because these convictions feel so natural, so obvious, we never think to question them. So what does the enlightened mind do differently? It does not add new knowledge. It removes avidya. And when that happens, it is like clouds parting to reveal a sun that was always there. The clarity was never destroyed. It was simply obscured. When those clouds part, the enlightened mind sees three characteristics that avidya has been hiding all along. Three qualities woven into the fabric of all conditioned existence, but that we have been trained by our own minds to overlook: impermanence, suffering, and non-self. If we ask most people whether they believe things are impermanent, nearly all will say yes. Of course, things change. We have seen it countless times. People we love have died. Our own bodies have aged. Impermanence is not news. And yet we live as though none of it is true. We build our lives on the assumption that certain things will remain. And when impermanence does what it always does, when it changes things, when it takes things away, we are shocked, as though something has gone terribly wrong. This is the gap the Buddha was pointing to. Not a gap in our knowledge, but a gap between what we know and what we actually see. There is a vast difference between understanding impermanence as a concept and seeing it as the living reality of every single moment. The Buddha taught, "One who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma. One who sees the Dhamma sees dependent origination." This is inseparable from impermanence. Everything is impermanent precisely because everything arises from conditions. When conditions are present, the phenomenon appears. When conditions change, the phenomenon changes. When conditions dissolve, the phenomenon dissolves. That is the nature of all conditioned things. The enlightened mind sees this directly, not as a theory, but as the immediate texture of reality. Every breath is already leaving. Every sensation is already passing. Every thought is dissolving before the next one appears. Nothing stands still. The entire field of experience is in constant motion, arising, existing for a brief moment, and ceasing, over and over again, faster than we can ordinarily perceive. And this seeing is not depressing. It is the beginning of freedom. When we are in the middle of deep suffering, what makes it feel unbearable is not the pain itself. It is the sense that it is solid, permanent, that it will be here forever. But when we see suffering as a process, arising from conditions, sustained by conditions, ceasing when conditions change, we realize it is not a wall. It is a wave, and what is moving will pass. But this opens up another question. If everything is impermanent, why do we keep clinging? Why do we keep grasping at what we cannot hold? That leads to the second seeing. Perhaps no teaching in the Buddha's path has been more widely misunderstood than his teaching on dukkha. People hear the first noble truth and walk away believing that Buddhism says life is misery. But that is not what the Buddha taught at all. At its deepest level, what the tradition calls sankhara dukkha, dukkha points to something subtle and precise. Anything conditioned, anything assembled from causes and conditions, is incapable of providing permanent, complete satisfaction. The reason is not that experience is bad or flawed. The reason is that it is impermanent. We are clinging to something that is flowing, and the act of clinging itself creates friction. That friction is dukkha. In his very first discourse after enlightenment, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha laid out the Four Noble Truths. The first truth identifies dukkha, but the second truth is the one that changes everything. The origin of dukkha is tanha, craving. As the Buddha described it, it is the craving that produces renewal of being, accompanied by enjoyment and lust, seeking delight here and there, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for being, craving for non-being. Notice what the Buddha did not say. He did not say life causes suffering. He did not say other people cause suffering. He said craving causes suffering. What if the problem is not in what we experience, but in how we relate to what we experience? The pain is not in the flower that wilts. The pain is in the hand that refuses to let it go. This leads to a distinction the enlightened mind sees with perfect clarity. Pain is unavoidable. The body gets sick. Loved ones pass away. Things we build fall apart. The Buddha himself experienced physical pain. He grew old. He fell ill. He died. He never claimed to have transcended the basic conditions of embodied existence. The enlightened mind does not escape pain. But suffering, the layer of reaction, resistance, identification, story building, that is what the enlightened mind has stopped. It experiences pain without turning it into suffering. As the Buddha described it, such a mind senses a feeling of pleasure and discerns that it is fleeting, not grasped at, not relished. It senses a feeling of pain and discerns the same. It remains disjoined from every feeling, fully aware, but not entangled. Paradoxically, this is the most intimate way to meet experience, because there is no filter between the mind and what is happening. No story, no resistance, just what is. Now something deeper demands our attention. If clinging creates suffering, then who is doing the clinging? What is this self that grasps, that resists, that builds stories? Is it even real? Of all the Buddha's teachings, this one meets the most resistance, not from outsiders, from us, because it challenges something most of us have never thought to question: the existence of a fixed, unchanging self. The second discourse the Buddha delivered after his awakening, the Anatalakkhana Sutta, is remarkable in its method. He did not make a declaration. He began with a logical argument, then moved to direct inquiry. First, the argument. If any of the five aggregates, form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness, were truly the self, they would not lead to affliction, and we would be able to control them at will, saying, "May my form be thus, may my form not be thus." But we cannot. The body breaks down. Feelings shift against our wishes. Thoughts arise unbidden. Therefore, the Buddha concluded, none of these are self. Then came the questions. Put to the 5 monks one by one. Is form permanent or impermanent? Impermanent. Is what is impermanent satisfying or unsatisfying? Unsatisfying. Is what is impermanent and unsatisfying fit to be regarded as, this is mine, this I am, this is myself? No. And he repeated this for all 5 aggregates. Notice how the logic flows naturally from everything we have explored so far. We have seen that everything conditioned is impermanent. We have seen that clinging to what is impermanent produces suffering. Now the Buddha applies that same seeing to something we rarely question: our sense of self. We must be precise here, because this is where misunderstanding most often occurs. The Buddha did not say we do not exist. He did not teach nihilism. He said we do not exist in the way we think we do. What we call me is not a thing. It is a process. A stream of physical sensations, feelings, perceptions, mental activities, and moments of awareness, all arising and passing in dependence on conditions. There is experience. There is consciousness. There is continuity. But when we look for a fixed entity at the center that owns it all, can we actually find one? This is not a philosophical abstraction. It is something we can observe in our own experience, right now. The person we were at 10 years old. Where is that person? The emotions we felt last year, where did they go? The opinions we held so firmly 5 years ago that we have since completely reversed, were those us? If the self were solid and fixed, none of this would happen. But it does, continuously. When this is seen directly, something begins to shift. The fear of rejection may loosen its grip, because if there is no fixed one, what is there to be rejected? The compulsive need to compare may fall quiet, because comparison requires two solid selves, and neither can be found. Even the fear of death may begin to transform, because what we were afraid of losing may never have been what we thought it was. Here, all three seeings converge as one. It is because we see impermanence that we understand suffering. It is because we understand suffering that we see through the illusion of self. Not three separate insights, one seeing with three dimensions. So if all of this falls away, if the assumption of permanence, the habit of clinging, and the belief in a fixed self all dissolve, then what is left? What does the enlightened mind touch when every filter is gone? There is a word almost everyone has heard, yet very few have looked into deeply. Nibbana. Most of us picture either a spiritual paradise or total nothingness. But what if it is neither? The Pali word nibbana means the extinguishing, like a flame going out when it runs out of fuel. And what is the fuel? It is exactly what we began with: greed, aversion, and delusion. When ignorance dissolves and craving has nothing left to hold on to, the flame does not need to be forced out. It simply goes out on its own. In the Udana, the Buddha spoke of this in some of the most remarkable words in all of the Pali Canon. There is an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated. If there were not that unborn, unbecome, unmade, unfabricated, there would not be the case that escape from the born, become, made, fabricated would be discerned. Let those words settle. The Buddha is not describing a place. He is not describing a realm we travel to after death. He is saying something very precise. There is an escape from the born, the made, the fabricated, and that escape is real, because he had realized it himself. Not through speculation, through direct experience. What is that escape? In the Samyutta Nikaya, he defined the unconditioned in plain terms. It is the ending of greed, the ending of hate, the ending of delusion. That is all. Not a mystical realm, not a hidden world. Simply the cessation, the complete, irreversible cessation of the very forces that distort our seeing. When greed ends, when hate ends, when delusion ends, what remains is not emptiness. It is freedom. A peace that needs nothing to sustain it, because there is nothing left to disturb it. And this is why the enlightened mind lives differently. Not because it has gained something supernatural, but because something fundamental has shifted. In the Dhatuvihanga Sutta, the Buddha described a mind where the currents of construing no longer flow. I am is a construing. I am this is a construing. I shall be is a construing. I shall not be is a construing. Construing, the Buddha said, is a disease, a cancer, an arrow. By going beyond all construing, one is called a sage at peace. A sage at peace is not born, does not age, does not die, is unagitated and free from longing. Such a mind does not waver before praise or tremble before blame. It has not become cold or indifferent. It simply has nothing left in it to be bound. And here is perhaps the deepest paradox of the entire teaching. By letting go of everything, we may discover that we lose nothing real and gain everything that matters. When we are no longer consumed by the need to protect a self-image, no longer driven by craving or paralyzed by aversion, then, for the first time, we are fully present. We listen without preparing a rebuttal. We see life without calculating what it gives us. We are finally here. Perhaps enlightenment is not a distant destination. Perhaps it is simply a stopping of the endless construction, the projections, the becoming. And when that stopping happens, what we find is what was always here. The mind, clear and undistorted. Experience, vivid and alive. Reality, just as it is. The Dhammapada, that ancient collection of the Buddha's verses, records a teaching that Thera Ananda once asked the Buddha about: whether the fundamental instructions of all Buddhas are the same. The Buddha confirmed that they are, and spoke these verses: not to do evil, to cultivate what is good, to purify the mind. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. Patience and forbearance are the highest practice. Nibbana is supreme. One who harms others is not a true practitioner. It sounds simple, and in a way, it is. But purify the mind. Those three words contain an entire lifetime of seeing, of practice, of letting go. Not purifying by adding something from outside, purifying by removing what was never truly ours to begin with: the greed, the aversion, the delusion, the clinging to a self that, when we look closely, we cannot quite find. So here we are. Right now, as these words reach us, we are breathing. That breath came in without our permission. It will leave without our permission. And between this breath and the next, in that tiny gap, there is a stillness that we did not create and cannot destroy. We do not need to go anywhere to find it. We do not need to become someone else. We only need to stop. Stop constructing, stop grasping, stop performing, and notice what is already here. Not adding anything, not taking anything away, just seeing. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough.